Minister, let's listen into the briefing.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to begin by thanking everyone again for your patience and for the sacrifices that you've been making. Businesses, pubs, restaurants that have been waiting to welcome customers back through their doors, grandparents who have gone for months without seeing their grandchildren, weddings postponed, funerals sadly constrained, and religious festivals such as Eid yet again facing restrictions. And I want to thank you particularly because your efforts have so visibly paid off, giving us the time to vaccinate more than 2/3 of all adults across the UK, with more than 1/3, nearly 18 million people, also receiving their second dose, and thereby unquestionably saving many lives. And so it's precisely because of your efforts that I can confirm today that we've met our 4 tests for further easing the lockdown in England. And Chris will run through the details in a minute. But with deaths and hospitalisations at their lowest level since last July, the UK's 4 chief medical officers today agreeing a reduction in the alert level, the data now support moving to step 3 in England from next Monday, the 17th of May. This means the rule of 6 or 2 households that has applied outdoors will now apply indoors, and the limit for outdoor meetings will increase to 30. From next Monday, you'll be able to sit inside a pub and inside a restaurant. You'll be able to go to the cinema, and children will be able to use indoor play areas. We're reopening hostels, hotels, B&Bs. We'll reopen the doors to our theatres, concert halls and business conference centres. We'll unlock the turnstiles of our sports stadia subject to capacity limits, and from next week, everyone will be able to travel within Britain and stay overnight, meaning schools will also be able to organise trips with overnight stays. We will no longer require face coverings in classrooms or for students in communal areas in secondary schools and colleges. All remaining university students will be able to return to in-person teaching, where they should be tested twice a week. We will increase the number of named visitors for those in care homes from 2 to 5. And residents will have greater freedoms to leave their home without having to isolate on their return. This unlocking amounts to a very considerable step on the road back to normality, and I am confident that we will be able to go further. Subject to the impact of step 3 on the data, we remain on track to move to step 4 on the 21st of June. And to give business more time to prepare, we'll be saying more later this month about exactly what the world will look like and what role there could be, if any, for certification and social distancing. And today, we're taking a step towards that moment when we learn to live responsibly with COVID, when we cease eventually to rely on detailed government edicts and make our own decisions based on the best scientific advice about how to protect our families and those around us. So from next Monday, we're updating the guidance on close contact between friends and family, setting out the risks for everyone to make their own choices. This doesn't mean we can suddenly throw caution to the winds. In fact, more than a year into this pandemic, we all know that close contact, such as hugging, is a direct way of transmitting this disease. So I urge you to think about the vulnerability of your loved ones, whether they've had a vaccine, 1 or 2 doses, and whether there has been time for that vaccine to take effect. Remember, outdoors is always safer than indoors. And if you're meeting indoors, remember to open a window and let in the fresh air. Keep getting tested regularly, even if you don't have symptoms, so you don't spread the virus without knowing it. And whatever you decide, I must ask you to continue to follow social distancing when not with friends and family, including in workplaces, shops, pubs, restaurants, and other settings. We only have to look at the very sad situation in other countries to see the lethal potential still of this virus, and we must continue to fight the spread of variants here in the UK. While we have no evidence yet to believe that these variants are completely vaccine resistant, we must remain vigilant. So, please remember, hands, face, space, and fresh air. And as we mark Mental Health Awareness Week, perhaps also take a moment to check in on friends and family and see how they are doing after all that we have been through together. Or, if you're struggling yourself, get the support that you need. Today, we are announcing the single biggest step on our roadmap, and it will allow us to do many of the things that we've yearned to do for a long time. So let's protect these gains by continuing to exercise caution and common sense. Thank you, and over to Chris.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The ministers actually set out 4 tests for moving between the stages, and I'd just like to lay out the data behind each of these tests. First slide, please. So the first test was that the vaccine deployment programme continues successfully. And I think it's very clear to everybody in the UK that this has been very successful. A steady rollout for people for their first vaccination. So we now have just over 2/3 of people have had a first vaccine in terms of adults, and just over 1/3 of adults have had a second vaccine already, starting with the most vulnerable. And this continues thanks to the extraordinary efforts of the NHS. Next slide, please. The second test was that evidence continues to show that vaccines are sufficiently effective at reducing hospitalisations and deaths in those vaccinated. There were original trial data. We now have very clear data from real-world settings, and some of that was published, further data was published by Public Health England today. And this shows that there is somewhere between a 55 and 70% reduction in terms of symptomatic disease for people who've had a first vaccine, around a 75 to 85% reduction in terms of hospitalisation, and around a 75 to 80% reduction in the chance of someone dying after they've had the first vaccine. We also have data, particularly from the Pfizer vaccine. It's accumulating for AZ, which we started to roll out slightly later, demonstrating that the second dose significantly further increases the protection, so that over 90% and possibly over 95% of people, protection for people from death if they have that vaccine. So this is undoubtedly, this test has been met. Next slide, please. There is, however, an important point to make on this, and that is that we know that the mortality, the chance of dying, and the chance of having severe disease is much more weighted towards people who are older or have pre-existing health conditions. And on the left-hand side of this graph, what we have is over the period of this pandemic, the total number of people who have sadly died of COVID in England. And what you can see is the red line demonstrates the age group to which we've got. So the majority of people in every age band over the age of 40 have now had a first vaccine, and a significant proportion of those at the top end of this have had a second booster dose. And they have got a lot of protection, but remembering this protection is not 100%. But on the right, what you see is the total number of people who actually have cases of COVID. And what this shows is that a substantial proportion of the people who catch COVID, and some of whom will get significant long-term problems themselves, but also who transmit COVID, have not yet been vaccinated. This tells us a very positive thing, that a lot of protection to those who are most vulnerable, but additionally it makes clear why it is that if we go too fast at this stage when things have gone so well thanks to the efforts of the entire population, that there is a risk of significant spread amongst those in the younger age groups. Next slide, please. The third test is that infection rates do not risk a surge in hospitalisations that would put unsustainable pressure on the NHS. And as the Prime Minister has said, the view of all the Chief Medical Officers for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and of the Medical Director of the NHS, based on advice from JBC, is not only that rates in hospital are very low, which we can see in this graph, showing there's been a steady decline and the number of people who've dying from COVID is now very small indeed, thankfully, in the UK, but that we do not think there is a likelihood in the next period after this upsurge of seeing a significant increase in pressure on the NHS, although some increase in transmission should be assumed as a result of the opening up that the Prime Minister has laid out. Next slide, please. The final test, and in a way the most difficult test, is the assessment of the risk from variants of concern. These are new variants of COVID, which might be one or other or both of either more transmissible than existing ones, and everyone in the country will remember that when the B117 variant first started emerging in Kent, it then spread incredibly fast, so more transmissible ones are potentially a problem, or ones which could cause problems with vaccination. And we do have some confidence that the vaccines we have provides a reasonable degree of protection from severe disease, but that can be reduced with some of the existing variants, including the one B1351 first described in South Africa, but others could emerge, or we might get more transmissible ones, and we have a concern at the moment about a variant called B1617.2, rather snappy name, first described from India. And this is actually spreading from very small amounts, but it is beginning to spread in certain parts of the country. And we need to keep quite a close eye on this. So the point about this is the threats are significantly reduced, but there are still some residual issues that we need to keep a very close eye on, and therefore we need to go carefully and steadily, as the Prime Minister has said.
Thanks very much, Chris. Patrick, anything to add at this stage? Then let's go to members of the public. Anne from York.
What proportion of recent daily infections is found to come from variants of concern other than the Kent variant?
Chris, I think I'm going to pass that one to you.
Yes, the numbers in terms of actually how many there were in the last slide, so I think people may want to look at the exact numbers. The proportions at the moment are less than 5%, are variants which are the not the B117, the Kent variant, which is the dominant one in the UK, but that's changing the whole time. Most of them are currently relatively stable. They're not increasing at a great rate. The one that is slightly concerning us in terms of increasing as a proportion is the variant which has been described from India, and that is in certain parts of the UK, and that does appear to be increasing, but from very low levels over the last 2 weeks.
Thanks very much, Anne. Thank you, Chris. Francis from Lincoln.
With the roadmap set to open up for physical contact, e.g. hugs, from the 17th of May, how are you planning to protect the unvaccinated under 40s teachers and support staff who will undoubtedly feel the consequences of this?
Well, Francis, thank you very much. And I know there's going to be a lot of people thinking about the guidance on hugging and how, if at all, they should respond. And I would say that people, as I said in my earlier remarks, people should obviously you should do it if you think it's appropriate, if you think the risks are very, very low, but you should exercise care and common sense. And clearly, with unvaccinated people, there must be a greater risk of transmission than with those who have had vaccination. But there again, don't forget, Francis, that even with 2 doses of the vaccine, although you will be at much less risk of death or of hospitalisation, there is still a risk of transmission, even though it's greatly reduced. So basically, Francis, it's up to all of us to exercise common sense and caution in the way we do it. Let's go to Hugh Pym of the BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Is it possible that you might even bring forward the June the 21st date for the final stage of the roadmap and the lifting of all legal restrictions, or will you definitely stick to that as the earliest possible time?
Hugh, I think it's very important that we should proceed cautiously, but as I've said many times now, hopefully irreversibly. And the secret of the success that we've had so far, I think, has been that we have been guided by the data, and we've given time to see the effect of each successive stage on the roadmap. So from March the 6th to April the 12th, and then from April the 12th to May the 17th, and then on to June the 21st, we've given ourselves a breathing space. What's happening today, or what's happening on Monday the 17th, everybody should understand, is a very considerable unlocking. And there will be a lot of extra movement, a lot of extra contact. That's just inevitable from what's happening. We think we can do it, but it's got to be done in a way that's cautious. And I think we'll want to have time to see the effects. You've heard what Chris has said about the presence of the Indian variant and other variants. We've just got to monitor these things as we go along. And I think what business would want to see getting ready for the 21st is as much certainty about that as possible, and that's what we aim to deliver. Thank you very much, Hugh. Romilly Weeks of ITV.
Prime Minister, now you're telling people to use their own judgment on hugging. Given that it is a significant factor in the spread of COVID, are you expecting people to be extremely cautious about who and how often they hug? If I can also ask who you're looking forward to hugging. And last week you said there was a good chance we could scrap social distancing rules altogether after June the 21st. The scientists doing the modelling suggest we have no idea what will happen if that is done. Would that really be a wise move in that case?
Thanks very much, Romilly. Well, I just repeat what I said. I think, and whoever I hug, I can assure you it will be done with caution and restraint. I'm not going to act it out now, but I think we all know what we mean. It's about basic common sense. And when it comes to social distancing from June the 21st, I look at the data very carefully, and I think at the moment it looks to me as though we may be able to dispense with the 1 metre plus rule. That's not yet decided. It's not yet clear. We'll have to wait and see. But it's by being prudent and being cautious that we've been able to make the progress that we have. As I say, we'll be saying more to everybody, more to business, to give everybody as much clarity as we can about how they should prepare by the end of this month, getting ready for June the 21st. Chris or Patrick, anything you want to add on the great hugging question?
Not on hugging, but I'll answer on the question about the post June the 21st. I mean, what the modellers have done is made an assumption there's still some residual reduction in transmission, and that's due to a number of things. Hopefully better ventilation. There'll still be people who are working from home who can work from home, and it's right for their business to do so. There will still be behaviours that we'll all demonstrate, which means that contacts probably won't be back to pre-pandemic levels. So on average, pre-pandemic, adults and children, roughly 11 contacts per day. Currently, it's down to about 4 or so for adults. So it will probably remain down for a while to come. It's important that we continue to isolate if positive or with symptoms. That's really, really important to reduce the number of people out in circulation who are potentially able to pass the virus on. And then, there may be other things as well required in certain circumstances. And it may be, as winter comes and if rates went up again, things like face coverings on transport might be necessary. But it's that first tranche of things, that first group of things that are really important in terms of keeping down the levels. And those aren't big impositions on any of us. They're A, what we're going to do probably in terms of how we interact with each other, and B, things like the ventilation, the ability to still stay working from home if it's appropriate to do so.
Thanks very much, Romilly. Tom Newton-Dunn, Times Radio.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Question to all three of you, if I may. On working from home, I know you're going to give business time to prepare, you said that, but so that they can start to think about it now, is working from home going to go as terms of guidance on June the 21st, or should people be thinking about that continuing through the summer, through the autumn, potentially even through Christmas? And Prime Minister, you won't say who you'll hug first, but who will you shake hands with first? And when are you going to start shaking hands again? You were one of the last to stop shaking hands, maybe. Who are you going to shake hands with when you're allowed to, and when will that be?
Tom, on all that, we're going to be giving, as I said, I mean, I don't want to be I don't. Your question's a very good one, but I think we're going to wait and give you more detail and more guidance about exactly what we mean by the end of social distancing later this month. I'm optimistic that things will get back much closer to normality, let me put it like that. But clearly people are going to continue to want to exercise their own judgment, their own discretion for a long while to come. You'll hear a lot more by the end of this month about exactly what the world after June the 21st is going to look like. At the moment, I'm feeling very positive about it, but we've got to be guided by the data. Anything to add on that? Thank you very much. Jason Groves, Daily Mail.
Hi, thanks, Prime Minister. Could I ask the scientists, given the excellent data we're getting on the success of the vaccines, could this now potentially be the last lockdown that we see, barring the emergence of any terrible new variant? And Prime Minister, can I just pick you up on that last point? You've said in the past that you would like to see people back at their desks at the end of all this. Is that how you see the future? Do you think people can work as effectively there, or is working from home got a big part to play in the future still?
Last lockdown, Chris Patrick.
Well, I mean, as the Prime Minister said, this is a big step that's being taken now. The step 3, lots of things are starting up again. Over the next month, there'll be many more people vaccinated. So the balance is between opening up and getting enough people vaccinated to be protected. So it's important that we don't get out of step with that and go ahead of ourselves. I think things are really pointed in the right direction. We'll have a much clearer idea of the effects of step 3 in mid-June, so we'll know what effect that's had. But everything is pointed in the direction that the vaccines are producing very effective reduction in hospitalizations and death, as Chris has said. We know that they're also reducing onward transmission. All of that points to this now being a much smoother path. It points to a lower increase than you might otherwise have expected with another wave. And things, if they carry on without variants, are definitely pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, and Jason, on your point about what's the world going to look like? Are people going to get back to work? Do we want people to get back to work? Well, I just remember when I was running TfL, I think I made this point before, observing a sort of paradox of transport, which is that the more people can communicate remotely with brilliant electronic devices, the more able they are to meet other people over the internet or through the ether, the more reasons they actually find to meet face to face. And I'm pretty certain, and I know this is contested, but I'm pretty certain that eventually our town centres are going to be, our city centres are going to be full of bustle, full of people wanting to interact again in the way that they always have done. Now, I might be mistaken in that belief, but I've a long experience of watching the way great metropolises operate. Leads me to suppose that is what will happen. Seb Payne of the Financial Times.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. What you've announced today suggests that the pandemic is beginning to become under control and we may be past the worst of the crisis. Where do you think it would be reasonable and not irresponsible then for Scotland to hold a second independence referendum? And for Professor Whitty, your slides showed that the number of cases of the Indian variant have doubled in the last week. Are you at all concerned this could destabilise the lockdown easing plans and could lead to a further lockdown in the autumn?
Well, Seb, on your first point, I had good conversations with all the heads of the devolved administrations, and I can tell you everybody was resolved that the number one priority for the whole of the UK was to build back better, come out of the coronavirus pandemic and build back better together.
On the Indian variant, I mean, in fact, there are currently 3 Indian variants, but the one that we're worried about at the moment in the UK is the 617.2. It has gone up very sharply, and I think that's a reason for us to be very careful about it. And there's a lot of work being done by Public Health England to try and delineate where it is and to work out ways by testing and isolation we can get that on top of get on top of the curve of that. India has also gone into the red list, which means that new people coming in will have been significantly reduced. But I think what you know, in answer to both your question and to the previous one, what we know is with all the variants that things can come out of a blue sky. You're not expecting it, and then something happened. That happened obviously with the B117, and that has happened to India with this variant as well. So I think it would be very imprudent to say it is impossible. I think at this point in time, I think our view is that this is a highly transmissible variant, at least as transmissible as the B117 variant. It is possible it is more transmissible, but we'll have to see at this point in time. At this point in time, our view is it is less likely to be able to escape vaccination than some of the other variants, particularly the South African one, but the data are not properly in there. So I think it is, we need to be cautious until we've seen clear data that give us an answer one way or the other. The reason I've given that as a relatively technical answer is, of course, we don't know whether this is going to cause significant problems in the autumn. The way to deal with that is identify the cases, which have been happening, isolate where we can, which is also happening, get through the rest of the vaccination programme, and ensure that we have the capacity to pick these up and also to revaccinate as necessary when the autumn comes. The final point on this is the way to minimise the number of variants that circulate is obviously get on top of this as a global problem. And that is something which all of us are absolutely determined to support.
Thanks very much, Seb. Adam Bienkov of Business Insider.
Prime Minister, you were on record as opposing the last Labour government's plans for compulsory photo ID cards, which you described as a recipe for tyranny and oppression. Why, therefore, are you now planning to bring forward in the Queen's Speech legislation which would force all voters to carry photo ID in order to vote? And given the fact that there was just a single conviction in the entire country for in-person voter fraud at the last general election, and given that studies show that Labour voters are much less likely to possess photo ID than Conservative voters, what do you say to people who suggest this is merely an attempt to suppress the votes of people who may not vote for the Conservative Party?
Adam, I would say that was complete nonsense. And what we want to do is to protect democracy, the transparency and the integrity of the electoral process. And I don't think it's unreasonable to ask first-time voters to produce some evidence of identity. So that's the reason. OK, everybody, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.